This episode is sponsored by Romanwell. Every patient experiences IBD differently and deserves a care plan that is as unique as they are. Whether you're trying to get into symptom remission, improve your energy levels, or restore your relationship with food, the IBD-focused dietitians at Romanwell are here to help you safely navigate it all. They work closely with you and your existing care team to find the best answers to your toughest questions. And they give you the consistent one-on-one support you need wherever you are on your IBD journey. Visit romanwell.com to learn how high-quality, individualized IBD nutrition care can help you achieve your health goals.
Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we talked to Nicole Williams. Nicole is a licensed professional counselor in Austin, Texas, and she specializes in working with people with chronic illnesses. We talked to her about the grief and loss wheel that she has developed related to living with a chronic illness. We talked to her about what to expect from a counseling relationship. We talked to her about self-advocacy and the power of that. And we talked to her about living well with a chronic illness. Cheers.
Hello, welcome to our show. I'm Robin, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Alicia. Thank you for the introduction, Robin. I appreciate it. Guys, today I was joking with our guest already that Robin and I already talked so much about mental health that you'd think that we had already done this, but we are very, very excited to bring in Nicole Williams. Nicole Williams is a therapist who actually works with people with chronic illnesses. So she knows a lot more about all the stuff we pretend to know. And so I think we've got so many questions for you.
Yes.
And I think people will really enjoy hearing from you. But we start out every episode by asking you, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking water and a Cali Red, a little bit of Cali Red right here.
Ooh, lovely. That's very biblical as well. Water and wine.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah. Little water, a little wine, all works out.
Perfect. Robin, what about you? Are you drinking?
I am drinking, not biblical.
No.
Not biblical. Went back to my old standard that I started with cider.
Oh, nice. Nice. And it's an Angry Orchard.
Cider. It is an Angry Orchard. Yes.
Your
That's
OG.
Good for Friday. There's some feelings and emotions there, guys, already talking about it. Angry Orchard.
OG. Yeah.
I am drinking a gin and tonic today just because I opened my fridge and saw a bottle of tonic and I was like, I haven't had that in a long time. So, and it's elderflower tonic, which is like one of my favorites.
Ooh, yum.
Lovely. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
So finally doing this, I think we've tried to get Nicole on a little bit and then we've run into some snags. So again, super, super excited to have you on. Nicole,
Excited to be here.
normally we ask people, what's your connection to the IBD community? However, yours is a little bit different because you don't work exclusively with people with IBD and you yourself don't have IBD, but you see a lot of folks with IBD. So tell us about how did you get involved in working with people with chronic illnesses?
That's a great question, Alicia. And I think, if we want to look at it timeline, it really started when I was 18 and I was experiencing a chronic illness. Well, it was the beginning of the chronic illness. I didn't know it then, right? A lot of hospitalizations, a lot of surgeries. And during these, one of my longest hospital stays was 4 months. It was the very beginning I had with my immune system just crashing, having had Epstein-Barr. And no one ever kind of checked in and said, how are you handling this? How is this affecting you? It was a lot about just the medical piece of it, right? Fast forward 20 years of still lots of doctors and trying to figure out what's going on with my immune system now and what is autoimmune, right? What does that mean? And surgeries later and still not really having a lot of support for the mental health piece. All the pieces that go along with it. And so when I decided to go into counseling, it was really clear for me of the support that I wanted to do. And then really shocking, actually, that when I talked about that within my program, there weren't that many of us. It's very few. It's just now that people are starting to say, oh, I want to specialize in that because of the link that we see with trauma and stress and in those pieces in chronic pain. And so when I first started eons ago, it was me and one other therapist that I Googled in Austin that actually said, this is our specialty. There was others that would say, we specialize in these, and then like down the list would be and medical health. But for those of us who say, no, this is what we are supporting. And so that was a little heartbreaking, but it's really changed. I'm excited to say that. I feel positive about that. And so with that, there's so many different chronic illnesses that walk through my door, some very rare, some not so rare. And what started to come through was Crohn's, colitis, different variations. So I became aware of the IBD community, and then just being able to support not just individuals, but families, and then supporting physicians and giving speeches and presentations about what it's like to support someone with a chronic illness or what it's like to experience chronic illness. So I've been really grateful and honored to be able to be part of the support for the community.
That's great. And I think that's really, I'm surprised it was only one other person that was willing to take this on, but I'm grateful that so many more people are starting to express interest in it, because I was just on a conference today for people with various types of autoimmune conditions, and they were talking about this, and somebody had wrote in the chat section that they just quote unquote broke up with their therapist because they felt like the therapist was minimizing how their chronic illness affected their day to day, and how often it was coming up in sessions. They would kind of like brush it off a little bit and ask him to focus elsewhere. And so that was disappointing to see, because I know there's so many great therapists out there like you who really do focus on this and help people cope. That was
one of the things that was really hard for me to hear, and I've heard it sadly to say too many times, my other therapist told me I'm identifying as my illness. And so there's certainly work, and we'll talk about our grief and loss wheel, but I think that becomes another layer of the shame and some of that feeling like the isolation. And so, and certainly I do want to kind of go back, Alicia, I don't think that we were the only two, but we were the only two that really, with a little honesty, when you put a Google search, right? Or we were the only two that were saying, hey, come to me for this is that piece of that I discovered, right? It was me going, okay, when I became full, who else does this, right? And it was kind of trying to find all these people, and it wasn't, whereas if someone says, I want to deal with grief and loss, oh, well, there's all of these people who do this support, or I want to talk about, divorce, there's all these people. It was really kind of a desert.
Well, that makes me think about when Josie was on, and she was talking about her own therapy journey. Like, she's in a master's program, a psychology master's program, and she said it took her 4 or 5 people before she found a therapist. And if they're, like you said, in Austin, there was 2. And if you are dating around to try to find the right therapist and you only have 2 options, that's a little disheartening.
It is. And I would say too that part of that is, and I'll have clients who say this, is certainly like, we don't have to experience everything that someone has who's coming to us for support, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that has to be the cut and dry, right or wrong. But there certainly is a different layer when someone has experienced what it is the client is coming in with. And so that is something else that I've heard as well, right? It's like, well, they say they specialized in it, but they don't understand the language I'm using when I talk about doctor fatigue, or I talk about, like, say that I just can't take one more medication, or I can't take this. The questioning becomes different. And so I think that's another layer that is important to kind of shed some light onto what it would really look like to support someone with chronic illness, of really understanding those nuances, like we do with everything. If I'm going to support a veteran, if I'm going to support someone who's experiencing something different than I have, I really need to understand those nuances.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to something you said, because we have mentioned on the show and talking with other guests that there is grief associated with being diagnosed with a chronic illness. And I know that's something that you have done a lot of work in and work with your clients on. So talk to us a little bit about how you talk about grief and loss with somebody with IBD or other types of chronic illnesses.
Absolutely. And I base a wheel, I call it a grief and loss wheel, on the Kubler-Ross grief and loss timeline, or we talk about the different levels that you go through. I chose to really look at it like a wheel because it isn't something that we have a start and a finish. And I think that's really important when we have that conversation, because oftentimes, especially if it's been a complicated way to diagnosis, we get to this spot where it's like, oh, okay, now it's all going to be over, right? And so we talk about the wheel, and why I think it's important is because oftentimes we can get on and off that wheel through many different times through the illness. So the first part of my wheel, and I gave that handout to you, Robin, if anybody's interested in it, the first kind of level of that is denial and confusion, is what I call it. And oftentimes it might be, the denial might look like symptoms being ignored as long as physically possible, out of fear, out of maybe just the way that you've been taught how to experience body and medical things, right? Of like, nope, not doing that, or I don't want to see what's behind that door of that diagnosis, so it's all good. The diagnosis, if they have one, might be completely avoided or minimized, right? Well, that's not me. That's not how I'm going to experience it. The amount of worry and panic over what that possible diagnosis might be may also prevent people from seeking help. And there's also, I want to be really clear about this, not for any ill intention, but there's sometimes possible misdiagnosis. And that can be a little bit of a setback, especially if it's in an area of an illness that might be a little bit more rare. And so those have implications for that. There might be lifestyles that become unmodified. The disease management might be inconsistent. And the layer that I think can be really difficult is that it may not be shared with family and friends. And that's when it starts to become in another part of the wheel we'll talk about in a little bit, which is that depression piece and that isolation. So you get through this big piece of denial, and there can also be confusion, right? Like, I don't understand what's happening. If a diagnosis is a long time in coming, there can be a lot of what we call relief for the next stage, which is, phew, I have a diagnosis, therefore my fear of unknown is temporarily minimized, right? And then I can have this whole dialogue in my head of like, okay, now that we know what it is, it's going to be a simple fix. That sometimes happens. But the relief can also come around, especially if you have a great support team in the medical piece of like, okay, now we have a treatment plan. We can create this. We have a plan. There's that idea of control, which is really important when we have any kind of chronic health, and control is felt safety. So if I can plan it, I can treat it. Okay, I can feel like I've got some handle on this. During the relief stage, we may also have where symptoms have, or the flare has decreased. We might have relief over a new medication or treatment option that may be working where before it wasn't. And then an increase in part of that stage we're going to talk about at the very end, which is integration. And we'll talk about a little bit of what that looks like. So we move through denial and confusion, we may get to the relief section, and then we get to the section where we sometimes spend a lot of time in, and we come back to often if we don't have some of the integration piece of how do I live while experiencing this illness, which is the anger and shame stage, right? The whys. Why is this happening to me? Why am I experiencing this? If there may be a perceived or an actual lack of support from health professionals or family or friends, we have anger around that piece. We do the should haves and the just. I just would have done this, or I should have done that, or I should have known this, especially if we're in a flare, if it's coming back through. Maybe things have been great for a while, we've been stable, and we're in a flare, or maybe we're having some medication that's not being as helpful as it has been, then it's the I just or I should have, right? So there's all of that shame language that we do. A lot of times in this, we get really angry over well-meaning advice from a lot of people who like, well, have you just tried? Yes, for the millionth time, right? Or my aunt's uncle's neighbor had this, and again, very well-meaning, but we'll hear a lot of, oh, I had the flu last year. I know how that felt, right? Or, oh yeah, I have this kind of food intolerance. I must know how, yeah, that was really hard. Or I can't eat cookies. That's really hard for me, right? And again, very well-meaning because there is this desire to help, right? But that can be met with this a lot of, because you're not understanding and it's not really that shared experience. And so our anger and shame can come in that spiral as well. Or just the minimizing of the diagnosis from others, right? And that happens a lot, again, out of fear. I don't know how to help my loved one. And so instead of verbalizing that, because that's really vulnerable, a lot of it is the justs and the shoulds to that person who's experiencing it. Can't you just get up today? Shouldn't you have done this, right? And that comes up a lot when we talk about the rebellion stage, which is kind of one of my favorite ones. So we'll talk about that one coming up. But
well, I think the other thing that happens too is people go, well, at least you don't have, like they try to say, like, show you that there's something worse. At least you don't have cancer. It's like, well, but that doesn't make this suck less right now.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. I don't have that, but this is still shitty right now.
I'm so glad you said that, Alicia. And not just, so I have a lot of clients who come in like that too. Like, I don't have the right to feel anger. I don't have the right to feel sad or to actually just feel. So we talk a lot about that of like, there's no judgment feelings. They are just what you're experiencing. Let's just state it, right? I feel angry, period, right? The other piece of that is the different layers with every chronic health condition or chronic pain is the many different layers within the diagnosis. right? And so there's often a lot of that put upon of like, well, but I don't have it as bad as so-and-so. I'm not experiencing it as bad as that. So I should just feel lucky and sit here and be quiet.
I call it survivor's guilt.
Yes.
When you don't have it as bad as, I had that for a long time when I thought I wasn't experiencing symptoms. I was like, well, you know, I felt bad for not being as sick as I was when I was originally diagnosed, which when you say that out loud, it just sounds dumb. Feeling bad for not being sick. And then when I got sick again, I was like, man, wish I could go back to feeling bad about not being sick.
Well, and our guest, Amy, like she talked about how she hadn't had surgery for her IBD. And so she felt guilty about talking about her IBD because she didn't have surgery and all these other people had surgery. She hadn't joined that quote unquote club yet. You know, it's like, well, that doesn't mean that you didn't experience symptoms and have your own struggles.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you don't mourn or grieve, you know, what you had before. So it's just really interesting.
It's really isolating too. I was wondering, Robin, when you had that, I feel bad. Mm-hmm. Did you feel like you could share that with anybody at that time?
Oh, no. No.
It's so isolating. And that's part of that piece that I want to give everyone permission to talk about that part, right? Of like, I don't know how this is going to come across, but this is how I'm feeling, because there's even shame in that feel of like, I feel bad that I have this, and that feels like I can't even share that with people. It's incredibly isolating in that space. So yeah, that's the piece, I think. And then when you have that isolation and that shame, then it can turn into anger or the should haves. And then when we do have a flare, it's, oh, I should have been happy in that moment. And then we beat ourselves up for that, right? Of like, I couldn't even enjoy it, right? It's that cycle and that spiral. So I talk with my clients all the time of like, let's just name it, right? Name it to tame it. Let's just say it without the judgment. I think the word "and" is beautiful. I talk a lot about that, but also just putting a punctuation mark that's a period at the end of it without all of the but. Like, yes, I feel bad, but I shouldn't I feel really cruddy, and that's just okay. So I think part of, and you just talked about that because it was great, of how it shows up, right? With anger and shame is it can look like I've lost who I was, right? Before the diagnosis. Or if it's like, well, I'm looking at these other people who have lost so much and I maybe haven't, then I don't have community. I can't talk about that, right? Whereas others may have a stronger sense of community because they can say, hey, I've lost this and I've lost that. Relationships change around it. And I know, Alicia, you and I have talked about this, Rob, I think you and I talked about it too, is this is not an easy illness to talk about. These illnesses are what we talk about, of like, we talk about that in private. We're talking, you know, from a very early age of like, that's bathroom talk, right? Like we don't talk about that. And so relationships change because people get quiet and they keep the pain inside, and that makes others feel separate, or you feel separate from them. And that can feel shameful and angry. And I think the big one, whether you have large symptoms or not, is the future's in question, right? Yeah. What will this look like? That's a really scary part. I think there's great community, but within community can also be some scary things. Like, what if this person's saying I should do this in a forum, and in this chat, this is what someone else experienced. Will that be what happens to me? And that's really scary. And I think that's the part of why I think mental health support is so important. Because when we're having these things, who am I now? And that's the biggest question I get. Well, that was me before the diagnosis, and I don't know who I am. And so absolutely having someone who can specialize in chronic illness, because that's a huge question, right? So the other thing I hear a lot too, and you may have experienced it, Robin, or Alicia, you've heard it, is I'm doing everything I was told to. Why am I still experiencing this? Yeah. And then the doctor is saying, again, very well meaning, and there's truth to it, right? We have to manage our stress. And we talk about like the nervous system and how to calm that and trigger our GABA and all of that. But if we're not being told how, and we're just saying, well, go manage your stress, that's not really helpful. It's like, here, go take some medication, but we're going to have, you go figure out how to give you that medication. You go figure out how to make it to the pharmacy and come back to us. It's like, okay, I joke about that, but it almost feels it's impossible. Like I'm supposed to go make my own medicine and figure it out. If someone just tells me to control my stress, okay. But that comes a lot of shame. Like I'm doing everything I'm told. Or what if I'm in a job where I can't lower my stress? Or what if I'm a new mom and I've got, newborn triplets? Like, how am I supposed to lower my stress that way? And so there comes a lot of that. I'm doing this to myself. I mean, just hearing that kind of makes me have a physical reaction when I hear clients say that too.
Well, and I see doctors also, because they want to help. Again, it's very always well-meaning, but I see doctors that are like, oh, you're stressed, and so I'm going to give you this medicine to calm you down. Like I'm going to give you something that will help you when you're feeling particularly stressed. But again, if you have certain jobs or you have kids, maybe you can't take those medicines to calm your stress. So then what do you do? Like, if that's your only option, you don't have any other coping skills, then you just live with stress.
Well, and let's talk about that too. If you are feeling isolated because maybe you don't feel like you have community, if you're not, maybe it's not possible to get mental health support around this. If, like you said, all these other things in this medication, those things are contributing factors, right? If we don't have the support, if we're not able to communicate it, if I don't know how to be an ally for myself, I don't know how to do that, right? If I'm sliding into depression around this, like those are all things on a physiological level that change how our body is going to process things, right? And so again, it's one of these things where it's the circle. That's why I do the wheel, right? Of like knowing how, like, okay, so if I am so we have bargaining research next, and then depression, right? We all do the bargaining research. I'm going to Google it. I'm going to go to the best clinic. I'm going to figure it out, right? Dr. Google. Sometimes it's a spiritual or cultural belief that we lean into. Sometimes it's just tons of research or looking at, things I'm going to agree to things with my providers. Sometimes that's the ruminating thoughts, that bargain and research that's going to keep me up at night. That increases stress, right? Those pieces, then all of that, if we're not attacking it in those little spaces, okay, I'm working with a mental health provider, I'm working with my doctor and saying, look, I am stuck on Dr. Google, I can't get out of it. What do I do? Those then can lead into the depression, right? With physiological, right? Where we are actually there's that biological piece where the dopamine and serotonin are having a different conversation with our body than we would want. But also we have the isolation based on symptoms and treatment, loss of relationships, that idea of loss of identity. This was me before, and now I'm not able to do some of the things I want to do. And think about all of that happening without support, right? Whether it looks like a therapist or family or friends, that's that huge piece of how do I get off the wheel? And so one of my favorite pieces, the rebellion, because I love it because it can be a place of empowerment if it is done through a lens of how do I help my body? And so a lot of times doctors, and you probably have heard this, guys, is doctors will say they're medication non-compliant, right? They're not doing, we've told them all the things to do and they're not doing it. But if we can reframe that and look at the need behind why, and most of the time it is a complete loss of control. I don't have any control. I'm tired taking the medication. I have like a bazillion supplements I'm supposed to take every day. In fact, my little supplement container's right here. It's not empty. So I'll get on that later. But the piece of that is that so much feels out of their control because of all of those things we just talked about. And so part of that can look like, not showing up to scheduled appointments, not doing the treatment that you're supposed to, or engaging in behaviors that are in contrast to your treatment plan, right? Pausing the self-care or supportive activities that you've come up with. But what we can do is like, okay, what's the need behind that? I need to have a voice. I need to be seen. I need to have some control. What can we do to get that need met that isn't in contrast to helping your body? And that's the part for me, I think, that can be beautiful, because that's the relationship that I think we need to start to mend with our body. It's about how do you have a different relationship with your body, right? If we're seeing our body as broken or damaged, that rebellion is going to feel different. If we can reframe it and a relationship with our body of like, wow, my body is being really strong while experiencing this illness. My body is allowing me to do this, even though it's exhausted from this illness, versus I'm broken. Then the rebellion looks like, how do I take care of my body, right? It's not, I have to do all of this. We can reframe as like, that is exhausting, and I know my body needs it in order to do that. And so what can I do to help it, right? Or if I need a break, what else can I do to my body, for my body, to help it in that respect? I think it's really important to, and we've talked about that, language is important around illness.
I really love that. I love the idea of reframing it from I have to do this to I want to do this to take care of myself, and having those days where every once in a while you just go, I don't want to do that. I'm going to have a rebellious day and I'm going to say, screw it. I'm going to not do what I should do.
Without the shame.
Without the shame.
Right.
I'm glad you said it that way. I'm glad you said it that way, Alicia, because I'm sitting here thinking about the word rebellion, because we talked about language and the energy that it has. And like, I have days like that, but I feel like it's just from exhaustion and not from the want to be rebellious. Although I will say that my vitamin B and my syringe is just sitting there on my counter with my little alcohol wipe waiting to be injected today. The calendar reminder pops up once a month, inject your vitamin B, and I haven't done it yet. But it's just like, oh, that's one more thing I have to do. So I don't feel like I'm being rebellious, but I guess I kind of am being rebellious.
Well, and I love that you guys brought up that language piece, because what I always do tell my clients is these are just my words. What word fits for you in that section, right? So for you, Robin, if it's not rebellion, if it is self-care, right? Like I need a break, or if it's self-first, right? And so this for me, rebellion for me is kind of like this fun. I see myself like with my 90s combat boots on, and I'm like, I'm taking my power. Right. So for me, rebellion is like this fun teenage version of myself.
Right.
That feels good. That might not feel good for everybody. So I tell clients, language is powerful. And I always let my clients know I'm a stickler for it, because our nervous system hears language. We know from research that everything has energy, including words. So when I say my body is broken, my body is damaged, I'm immediately going through, I can't, I won't be able to, what's my life going to be like? My entire body position starts to shrink. If I say my body is experiencing pain right now, then I'm in the present. I am not thinking of 5 years from now. I'm experiencing a flare currently. What do I need to tell my doctor? That feels different, right? And it feels accurate. My body is protecting me, which when we have chronic pain, instead of saying it as this is a threat, it's a warning, it's a message. And I'm not a big believer in like, we have to be positive, and because all of that's not accurate either. But when we can shift the lens and say, oh my gosh, thank you for that message. Thank you for this message. Now I've got it from here. What do I need to do? It feels very different. It feels empowering versus I am at the mercy of, because I am broken and damaged.
You can still feel angry at that. Like, I think recognizing
Absolutely.
You can say like, I hear this message. I hear what you're telling me. Thank you for the message, but fuck that message. Like you can still be angry at it, and that's okay. As long as that you do something with it. You
can say it in your combat boots.
I will riot girl that.
You hit my word, Alicia, and right? Because that's so important. I think so many times we think that if I'm going to say that I want to be kinder to my body, then I have to be rainbow sunshines and unicorn. No, it's I see you and I feel you, and I'm really pissed. Like I'm really angry and I'm really hurting and I'm really frustrated. We get to say both. And then we get to say, you know what, I'm going to talk to you right now, body. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Right now, I'm going to take a day of just being really mad. And then tomorrow I'm going to check in with you and go, okay, what do you need? You get to do that. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Do you find with your chronic illness patients in that same conversation, just that sense of loss of trust with those signals from their body? Because I had a therapy session today. I was just talking to my therapist today, and we dove into that. Like, I have to trust the signals from my body to tell me what's going on. But I've had Crohn's disease for 22 years, originally diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and then changed to indeterminate colitis, and then changed to Crohn's disease. And I've experienced all different kinds of pain. And every time there's a new one, I'm like, okay, what is this one telling me? And I don't know if this is the right word, but it's like a dichotomy of I have to trust what my body's telling me, but can I trust what my body's telling me?
What if you changed it? Because I hear have tos, which automatically makes us feel pressure, right? What if it was, I want to be curious about what my body's telling me?
Oh, that's going to take a lot more work from me.
Yeah, it will, because your brain has that pathway. I have to trust. So part of that, Robin, I want you to think about that of like, and yes, to answer your question, I do have that, right? Because we've learned to be in hypervigilant mode, because sometimes it has literally saved our lives, right?
Right.
What is this pain? Do I need to go to the emergency room? Is it just to call my doctor?
Right.
But what's behind that is not, there's two fears, right? Fear of what is this going to be? And fear of what if I'm wrong? There's a lot of this piece, right? What if I don't catch it in time? What if I don't do the right signal and it gets worse and I didn't react the same way? And then sometimes for some people, it's the fear of what if this is nothing and my doctor stops believing me because I called twice this month? I get that sometimes too. And so part of that looks like in that moment is part of that nervous system calming that I really work with clients on. So get the message and pause before we go down, because it's just a neural pathway. It's a thought pattern, right? Of I get the message, my nervous system. So what I'm hearing is your nervous system is kicking in, right? What do I do? How do I react to this? Fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn, like, because again, that has saved many of us. How do we say to turn that off? We don't want to turn it off. We want to be curious. So we want to say, okay, I'm hearing this information. I need, before I know what to do with it, I need to calm my nervous system. I need to do either my bilateral stimulation. If you're working with me as a client, you're listening to some bilateral stimulation drum beats that are going to help release GABA. You're doing breathing. You're going to your safe place visualization. You're doing the mantra words, because again, words have power. We're doing something to calm so that we can stay present. Oftentimes when we get a symptom, our brain's already 10 paces ahead of us. And so that's where we're kind of going, what am I doing? And so for you, I'm not sure where quite the trust piece is coming in. It's so different for lots of clients. But for me, I go, let's not go there quite yet. First, we got to calm so that we can receive that information and go, okay, now what am I supposed to do with this information? That's why I use the word curious, because I go, okay, hold on, let's be curious. Because if I'm saying that, it feels different than I have to be able to know how to do something. There's so much pressure in the have tos. Does that make sense?
It so makes sense. And the word curious makes me so uncomfortable. I will be writing that down and taking that up with my therapist in 2 weeks. I mean, today when we were talking, I was like, she said some things and I was like, oh, now I'm going to have to do this work. Like I knew that. And now you're saying this to me and I'm like, dang it. You're the third person in this week that I'm going to have to do this stupid work.
But I think that's an important thing to learn though, because therapy does take work. And I think that's what some people, they think they're going to show up in your office, Nicole, and that you're just going to make things better for them. And no, I mean, therapy, it can really be hard and you can examine some stuff that feels really icky and really awful, but you have to work through it in order to, it's like getting a colonoscopy. It's not fun to prepare for a colonoscopy, but you like get the answer at the end, like, but you got to get through it first. Which is a really prolonged colonoscopy.
Yeah. And please know, Robin, that us therapists, we don't like doing our own work either. We still the same thing. Dang it, I still got to do this. So as humans, right, it's hard to do this stuff. And, you know, love quoting Glennon Doyle, but we can do hard things. It's hard, but we can do hard things when we have support. And part of that, again, language is important, but part of it is learning or being taught how to self-advocate. That is just as important with my clients, because a lot of times we think we do. When we have white coat syndrome, it's typically what we think of is when someone goes in the doctor's office and they go, oh, your blood pressure is high. You're having white coat syndrome. You're nervous. To me, there's another piece of that of when I sit in the chair and I don't know how to interact with someone in the medical community. I have questions, but I don't feel like maybe I have time to talk about it, or maybe I told myself they're silly, or maybe I'm just deferring to them, even though maybe I have a difference of opinion of how I'd like to be treated. And so that's the piece of teaching people to really learn how to communicate and have advocacy, and then have a support team, right? Of like, what will that look like? Of who can be a person who can go to visits with you to write things down? Who can be a person who, if you have a surgery, can rally people around for care around that? Who can be your warrior? Who, like, you know, if you're in one of these moments, who's maybe going, you know, I'm broken, I'm this, I'm not saying, remember, there's a different language that you used last month. That was really insightful. What was that, right? And so having the support team is important with you as the top. I think we a lot of times think the doctor is the top of our support team. And I really change that for clients. I want to say, no, you are the top of your support team, right? You're the advocate. But that's something I don't think that we're taught, really. It's something you have to learn. It's not something that we just go, oh, I know how to do that when I go into a doctor's office.
I don't want to brush over that. You, as the patient, I want everyone who's listening to absorb this statement. You, as the patient, are the top of your care team. That's you. Yeah. And everyone on your care team is working with you to support you and your choices, and to help educate you about your choices, and to help you make the right decisions. And you have that right, and you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't take action and advocate for yourself and be that person and I know that not everybody is there yet. Not everybody can be there. Not everybody feels comfortable. This is not a judgmental statement on my part. I didn't want that to just be like a sentence and then just keep moving on to the next topic. I feel like it's important for patients with chronic illness and IBD to know that it is a team, and they're the team captain.
I like that team captain. Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Well. Have you ever felt overwhelmed and unsure about what questions you should ask your doctor, or if you should get a referral to a dietitian? If so, you are not alone. The dietitians over at Well help patients every day navigate these questions and many more. They've just released an amazing free resource for patients called the IBD Patient Starter Kit that is jam-packed with tips and tools to empower you to become your own best advocate. Check out the show notes or head on over to romanwell.com to download a copy of the IBD Patient Starter Kit today.
What's important though is that like there are going to be times when you're feeling not well enough to really be your captain. And that's why when you said like have somebody to come with you who can be your warrior, like to have somebody else that knows what you want and that you've talked to and that's on your side to be able to go, hang on, that's not what she wants, and either pause the conversation and bring you in or say, we just talked about this and this is really the direction. And you can just kind of nod exhaustedly beside, you know, like that's key.
Yes.
You don't. And I always say too, in that piece of that, of like, even if they can't be in the room with you, we have wonderful technology, right? Put them on speaker, do a FaceTime. And it's helpful. And most physicians love that because there's someone else hearing it. And so, and especially if it's in the beginning of a diagnosis, if your diagnosis is changing, if your symptoms are changing, the internal dialogue you have can often be louder than the conversation in the room. And so we're missing things that we don't even realize that we're missing. And so having that second person can say, oh, wait, the doctor suggested this or had this question, and can be a great recorder of that. The other thing I really think is really important, and again, this is someone that you could get in your support team to help with this, especially when we're just not feeling up to it, is to be a great historian, right? Create that binder. I sent Robin, you and Alicia a little mini packet of the care plan that I give my clients when they walk in of, start your timeline, start your physician, start writing what medications worked, didn't work, gently do it, right? All the scans and this, but keep it in one spot and have the person who is usually the one consistently that goes in or the person not just be like, hey, here's some tabs. We got to keep open on this. Because again, when we have that internal dialogue going, sometimes we forget to, oh, I've already tried that. Or this physician said this about this process. And so having that piece with you, I just carry it around like it is on my hip, like it just goes with me everywhere. And if I don't need it, I don't need it. But if I do, I've got it right there. And that just becomes a source of comfort because again, it's empowering. My history is in my hands and I get to share that with you. The other thing I wanted to mention, Robin, which I thought was great when you were saying it's, again, I love the team captain idea, right? Language is amazing, but even the word you. So I see you as in three parts. We have self, which that can be for whatever. We can believe it's personality. You can believe it's soul. You can believe it's just the cognitive piece of that. And then we have body. I think of it like a triangle. Then we have our body, and then we have our illness. And I really separate those out because when we talk about that piece of you and that relationship being one that's more of support, I really focus on self and body and reconnecting that piece. And then taking a look at what the illness experience is like for us two, between me, the you, and my body that we're experiencing, and the illness. And just gently kind of separating that sometimes gives us a little bit of relief to change our language. But it can also talk about different needs. My body might have a different need than what my emotions are feeling right now, right? Then also what my illness is feeling. So being able to be really accurate on what we're needing helps your care team, right? Of really going in and saying, yes, this medication's working great for my body, but emotionally it's not working. Or it's really working great for this illness, but it is taking a toll on the rest of my body. And having that accurate language and kind of seeing you taking, all three of us by the hand and walking into that is really important for the care team too.
I'm really glad you said that. I think I had like a little bit of a light bulb moment there because you're right. Like if you're taking a medication and yes, it's working for your disease, but maybe it's terrible for you as it relates to trying to get to your job or trying to do childcare, or it just doesn't fit in some way, then yes, it is important to get all of the pieces right. I think that's really, wow. Okay, cool.
Very important point also. I'm going to use that from now on.
It's important. And I think the self part is looking at all the pieces of us, right? If again, it's the rewording of I'm not my illness, but I'm experiencing this, but also I'm a mom or a dad or a brother or a sister or a teacher or a doctor or, a student. All of these different pieces are important, right? I'm an athlete or I'm an avid crafter. What are these pieces that give us joy and purpose and meaning? And that those are really important. And that's that part of that wheel that we end up with, which is integration. It's how do I still live this life of joy and meaning and purpose and be all the different components and different parts while experiencing an illness, right? And so part of that is that connection between body body and self that looks supportive. It looks like having that whole team captain and team behind you and being able to actually verbally communicate your needs and being able to be clear on what those needs are. So it's not just self-advocating to doctors. I think this is a really important point. We think of that like, yeah, I do. I go in to my doctor and I tell them what I need and I tell them like, this is happening, but then I go home and I put the I'm okay mask on and I don't tell my partner or my kiddos or my spouse, and I don't tell my colleagues at work when I'm really suffering and I'm in pain, because I just want everyone to be okay. And a lot of that comes from that idea of I don't want to be the sick person. I don't want that to be my identity. And so that's the work we do around that internally as well. Like, what does it look like to communicate? And so that's part of that integration. And the reason it's a wheel again is because we don't always stay in integration, right? It's the understanding that there are moments where we will be advocating for ourselves and communicating, and then something just might occur in life or with my illness that has me feeling why and angry or in shame. And then I'm going to do the work around that. And I'm going to know that it's temporary. And I know I have my tools. And then I'm going to move back into integration. Or I might have a flare and I'm moving back into, I'm feeling isolated. I couldn't go to this event and I'm missing out on that because my body is experiencing this illness and I'm having to slow things down. And I'm feeling some sadness and depression around that. And then I know I've got my tools around that. And I'm going to use my support and I'm going to move from this space. And so it's knowing that it is something that we can move in and out, but with support and tools is the important thing, making sure that we're not stuck in one area.
Yeah, I like the visual of a wheel because I think it gives you permission to stay in that place for a little while, but also gives you permission to take yourself out of it as well. You know, like I can move through this, I can move to a different stage and that's okay. And yeah, that's,
you know, things are temporary.
Yeah, that's a really nice visual for it.
There's even one, I know we're not going to have time to talk about it this evening, but there's even one for caretakers and loved ones who have people who experience chronic illness, because they are on a wheel as well when they're with us.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too, because I do think care providers or care partners or family members don't feel like they have permission to grieve and to go through this. I think they just think, you know, that's the other person has the illness. I don't have the right to be angry or sad or depressed or any of these emotions.
Or sometimes I don't have permission to be sick, right? Like I'm not experiencing this. I can't just say that I'm having this kind of moment or day or this experience. And so, yeah, communication is really important.
Matt better not do that to me. He better not come here and tell me he's sick. With the man flu. You all know it exists. You all know it exists.
Mm-hmm. We do.
No,
yes.
Yeah, I've gotten better about being empathetic with the man flu.
I guess I'm going to give you an at least on that one. At least he's not telling you he knows what it's like to have IBD when he has his man flu.
No. But he does get his colonoscopy every 5 years, and he does try to compare that with mine, you know, having 3. I'm going to have 3 this year at least. So I feel like.
All right. Well, we'll get on him about that at least.
That's right.
Again, see how important language is? No saying, I know how you feel. No, let's just take that away from our vocabulary altogether. We put that in the no-fly zone.
You only just touch the surface of energy and things having energy. You only mentioned it. So I am a huge, I know you said research supports it, but even on a more, I don't know, I'm going to say spiritual sense, just feel things energetically. I just feel them. I feel other people's energy. And I know on an internal level how important it is and how much it affects me. So I would really love to just talk a little bit more about energy. Absolutely. And the energy that our words have and how that affects us.
Well, and if you think about it, there's a great resource, guys, called heartmath.org. They are a great research organization who's looking at these very things, like how does energy and how does our nervous system sync up, when it's in a room, right? And so they have a great information on their website, and they've done the research about how even in the room within 6 feet of another person, we sync up, right? They've proven it's amazing, right? And so when I work with kiddos and parents, I always talk to parents about how we need to meet them down here and sync up so that if kiddos having a big moment, we get quiet, we get calm, so they sync up to us instead of vice versa, right? But most of the time we want to sync up with them because we're like, I'm losing it, right? So it's a lot of that. Think about the way that we give energy to words. We know that words are constructs, right? It's that meaning, but it's really hard to look at someone and say, we're angry or we're looking at something and we want to say, I hate that. it's really hard to try to say, I hate that with love and intention in your voice. It almost feels impossible, right? Or to look at someone and say, oh, I feel so peaceful, but to try and say that with anger behind it. It's like not the way that our brain works, right? And so, but when we say these things like, my body is damaged, what starts to happen with that, there's a tone to it, right? There's an energy, there's a belief system behind that. And then there becomes a thought pattern, and that literally impacts the way our heart rate goes, the way our breathing, our nervous system reacts to it. Are we starting to have cortisol run through our body? Is there adrenaline happening? What's going on? Am I already starting to go into collapse mode? What's the images happening in my brain, right? So all of that work in your brain that's happening, it's wiring that piece, right? You've always heard Dr. Dancy will talk about the, neurons that fire together, wire together. So if in this moment I'm having an image and I'm having a physical experience of pain, and then I'm telling it I'm broken, I'm setting up that negative belief system. Well, that has a physiological impact on my body, an emotional impact on my body. And so the energy behind that, constantly over and over, telling yourself that over and over, that's the part where we set up that neuro pathway, right? And that's that negative cognition that changes. And so one of the things Gary Brothers talks about, and he does a lot of that energy work with the pain, is that when we do this, and he does a lot of work with the vagus nervous system, is that when we can hold, there's one space where he has you hold a space in your stomach and say something that you really believe that's positive, that you to your core believe, and there becomes to be like almost a pulsing, you can almost feel it. And then we say something negative and that feel goes away, right? And it's this interesting thing, and it's all about how it links up to our nervous system. It's the beliefs that we have. We've all seen that, right? We'll see a little kiddo who says something to another little kiddo that's hurtful, and we watch that child's shoulders crumble, right? We tell kids all the time that, sticks and stones might break my bones, but words will never hurt me. No, words can be some of the most powerful because of what we believe attached to that. That's that energy, is that belief, right? And so over time, what happens when you keep telling yourself I'm broken, right? I'm damaged, is what that happens inside the nervous system and the body. And that's that energy behind it. And even just saying that, when we say it out loud, it just feels hard. It feels yucky, even though that may be what we believe, right? And so sometimes it's as simple, Robin, like you said, like curious, nope, gonna have to do a lot of work on that. Sometimes it's a shift in that of like, okay, I feel like I have to trust it. I'm not ready yet, right? Even something as simple as that, like that's giving that permission to go, let me take a breath. And so we watch it, right? And when I work with clients, I'm watching the nervous system, right? I'm being taught to do that, of like watching that nervous system and how is that reaction? What's happening for them? And it happens to us, all the time. We're reacting. Our body is scanning 30 times a second. We are scanning.
I will tell you that one thing that I did before therapy, this was years ago when I was thinking I was like doing a lot of personal growth or whatever, but self-help. But this was years ago, whenever the negative, that pattern, right? Those thoughts pop in your head, just that negative, whenever that negative thing would pop in my head, I would say out loud, I forgive myself. I forgive myself for thinking that thought or thinking that about myself, or, whatever it was. It just went, that's really how I reprogrammed a lot of that. But now, like today with, oh my gosh, I have to do that work. There's still some of that stuff that just lingering there. And I had stopped doing that. God, maybe I was 30, maybe it's almost 20 years ago when I was doing that. That is really disappointing to say out loud that it was almost 20 years ago that I was doing that. But it really worked. Like it really shifted my mindset. It really changed the way that I was, I got through life and the way that I talked to myself mentally. Right. Yeah. So,
and maybe Robin, part of that is, like we all I love that piece, like I forgive myself. Right. And part of the next layer might be, wow, I see why you feel that way. Wow, that's got to be really hard, right? Like that, I'm sorry that you feel that way, right? There's that care and compassion that we don't always give ourselves. We give that to all the people that we love, our friends and family, right? And turning that inward is that energy again. I'm so sorry that this feels this way. And I understand why. And forgive yourself. It's that piece. And that's where that energy shifts. Listen to the tone that we use when we say, I forgive myself versus I'm broken. And so if we can just, in those practices, just starting to, part of that is, okay, noticing, right? You're noticing this is a shift that helped me. And then we go, okay, what's the need behind that, right? What do I need to hear? What do I need to feel? And then practice that piece. And often,
dang it, now I'm crying.
It's always a good podcast when you have some tears.
Thank you so much for this episode. I mean, I'm not ending us. I'm just like, This is Robin's way to get free medical advice, everyone. This is Robin's way to get free medical advice.
Well, I could talk about this for days on end. I'm passionate about it because I don't think we talk about it enough. I think what is beautiful is that we are now talking about mental health so much more. And I don't like to even use the word mental illness. I like to talk about mental wellness, right? Yeah. Like we talk about that with everything. And so it's all about how to be healthy, how to be well with the foods that we do, but let's just talk about how to be mentally well, like mentally strong in certain areas, like how do we support mental support, right? And so this is something that is now becoming really well known, I think, for the first time a lot, I think, in the medical field of like, there's a lot more to be said. I love that a lot more doctors are using the ACE quiz, which is the adverse childhood events, in their intake, which is looking at, again, that idea that Oprah's book says is like, what happened to you? What have you experienced, right? Not what's wrong with me. And just even that language change. But it's so intertwined, the things that we experience and the way it shows up in our body. And then how do we help our body, right? There's I think a lot of misconception of, well, something hard happened to me and therefore I am damaged. I can't undo that, where that really isn't true, right? It's like, then we learn to process it. We learn to have those healing tools and strategies. And you're right, it never goes away that this experience happened. My chronic illness will never go away, but I learn to support my body and I learn to support my emotions and my mental wellness in a different way. And so I would love every doctor to be hearing this. I would love every medical community to have that understanding of, it really is the whole person that we have to treat and support. It's not just unfortunately, the 15 minutes that most things have been having to, go down to time-wise.
And I think there's something empowering even about changing the words from illness to wellness, because illness does feel like you're othering somebody, like, oh, you have a mental illness, that's so abnormal, when the reality is that all of us have had adverse childhood things that have happened, or adverse things that have happened in our lives that maybe you didn't associate with how that trauma and how that integrates into your body. And so I think just reframing it like that takes away some of the stigma and takes away a little bit of that othering. I feel like that happens when you say mental illness.
Yeah. And we're fighting the stigma, right? And we're just making slow progress with that. But to understand that trauma is experienced on a cellular level changes that thought, right? Of like, wow, that's not something that just I experienced at 6 or 12 or whatever. And, the idea of like, well, you should be over it. Well, my cells experienced that. Right? I can't just tell my cells not to have Crohn's, right? I can't tell my cells not to have, type 1 diabetes. You would never look at someone and say, well, just get over that. You don't have rheumatoid arthritis. Just get over that, right? But it's different when it becomes something that a trauma experience or when people label it mental illness. It's like, well, there's a medication for that. Just, you're fine.
Yes, there are medications that can help, but that doesn't work on the thing that was behind the thing. So it can definitely help you, but it does not like it's a cure where you take this course of antibiotics and you don't have it anymore. That's unfortunately not how that works, even though I think we all wish it was.
Well, it's on a physical level. Like when you take antibiotics, they always tell you, okay, go now and take probiotics. You're going to have to do these other things. You're going to have to support your body in other ways. And so it's just interesting that there's sometimes a different communication.
Right now, therapists are at a bit of a shortage. I mean, a lot of people are seeking treatment right now. So if somebody doesn't have the availability of working with a therapist like you, or doesn't have the means to be able to do that, because unfortunately it doesn't have great insurance coverage for lots of people, are there things that you can recommend to people? Are there websites, tools, tricks, things that they could be doing to kind of help start this process, help learn some of these self-advocacy skills, help starting to deal with and understanding where they're on this wheel, things like that?
So yes, and I think a lot of it is, and again, it's hard if you are in the space of not feeling well, of having to kind of do that work yourself. And I will send these resources, Alicia and Robin. I don't know if there's a way to get them out to your listeners, but there are some wonderful books. There are also some great resources. There's a website called mygooddays.org. There's a website called healingwell.com. There is a website called wearecapable.org, and that's a great resource for those who are also looking for employment ideas, but have a chronic illness and have limitations that need to be addressed. There are some great resources book-wise: 7 Steps to Living with a Chronic Illness by Matt Cavallo, Life Disrupted, Getting Real About Chronic Illness in Your 20s and 30s, Sick and Tired of Feeling Sick and Tired, Living with an Invisible Chronic Illness, Surviving and Thriving with an Invisible Chronic Illness by Lana Jacqueline, How to Live with Chronic Pain and Illness, A Mindful Guide, You Don't Look Sick, Living Well with an Invisible Chronic Illness. So I think certainly some of this to me is the first step of knowing you're not alone and there's not isolation. There are others experiencing this. I would absolutely go on, if you are in the Austin area, I know there are several places that do support with sliding scale if finances are a challenge. One of them is Capital Area Counseling here in Austin. If you are looking for someone specific with chronic illness, I recommend this whether you are looking for someone who takes your insurance, if you're looking for someone who does sliding scale. I always say, ask for a consult. And what I mean by that is see if this is a good fit. Ask the important questions. I think it's vital to have a person who really, first of all, has good rapport, but also understands what your needs are. Asking them, it says you specialize in chronic illness. What does that mean, right? It says you specialize in chronic pain. What does that mean? Well, I understand trauma and chronic illness. Okay, but what does that mean? Do you have experience with a loved one with it or yourself? Again, that doesn't mean it's a deal breaker, but it's just more information. Do you understand the perspective currently in the medical field around chronic illness and trauma? What is your understanding about how trauma shows up in the body? So it's okay to ask those questions. I think, again, we get in the room and we think we're supposed to get quiet with the therapist and hope that they take us on as a client. But I really want to encourage anyone who's looking for a therapist to ask important questions, interview them. If I have a new client come in, I immediately have a list of referrals for people who I know who still have openings. And I say, hey, if this is not a good fit, I think I can work with you. But if maybe you're looking for someone with a different strategy or aspect or energy level, I sometimes have a big energy, please feel free, go out and look for some more people, right? I am not offended. My goal and every therapist's goal should be that the person just finds support, right? And the right kind of support. I can have all the best tools. I can have my wheel, I can have my bilateral stimulation skills and all of that. But if I am not making the connection, or if I am not meeting the client where they need, then all of that is not really helpful. And so I highly encourage every person looking for a therapist to go in with questions and ask what it looks like for their support.
We've mentioned it as it relates to gastroenterologists that I think a lot of people walk in and think, well, you will be offended as a therapist. You'll be offended if somebody says, hey, this isn't working, I'm going to move on over there. And I'm sure there's a part of you that's like, damn it, like that didn't quite work. But at the same time, just like you go to a different gastroenterologist for a second opinion, maybe you go to somebody else to get a second opinion and you realize, actually, no, this worked really well and I want to go back to that person. Yeah. There's no offense. You're not going to suddenly be like, well, never mind, you don't like me and I don't like you now, kind of thing. That's not
how it works.
They're feeling that there's like a hesitation, there's no connection. The first thing that's important about therapy is rapport, right? And that trust. And if there's not a trust that's being built for whatever reason, then it's not going to work, right? Like it's finding the rapport and the trust and that connection with another therapist. And yeah, never an offense. That's actually what I always say. I will never be offended. My job is that you get support, whether that looks like through me or a referral.
That's
and I will say this too for people listening, if you are working and your employer has an employee assistance plan, a lot of times those include consultations with a mental health provider. And if it sounds daunting, what we're talking about, like maybe you'll have to see 2 or 3 or 4 people before you find the right person, it might be beneficial to just check with your HR or just ask for the employee assistance plan. And that way you can review it and see if that is included as part of it. And you can do these consultations by the phone and they'll help you find someone that takes your insurance. They'll help you find, someone that specializes in what you're looking for. So don't forget that if you do have a job and you have benefits to that job, check with your HR to take advantage of the benefits that are provided by your employer.
That's a great reminder. And also, Robin, there's websites like psychologytoday.com and I think it's Sondermind, I think is another one where you can literally plug in the things you're looking for. I'm looking for a therapist who specializes in chronic illness in this zip code, who takes sliding scale or takes Humana, and it will populate the ones that are available that's seeing clients. And then it populates and you get to read a little blurb about them and then set up a consultation. There are a lot of websites out there now that kind of put the guesswork out of it. And that can be someone else that's very close with you that say, look, these are the things I'm looking for. I'm too tired to get on the website. Can you at least pull me up 5 or 6 that I can look at when I've had a nap or a rest and I feel like I've got some stored energy?
That makes a lot of sense. Well, very good. Well, Nicole, you mentioned your wheel and the sort of visual with that, and we're going to make sure we try to figure out how to link to that in the show notes so people can look at that and even bring it to their doctor, bring it to their psychologist, their therapist. And we have some other resources that you've shared with us as well that we'll make sure we put in the show notes for people to take a look at. But we really want to thank you for talking through a lot of the things that we have, I think, sort of mentioned a couple of times or that have come up in our episodes, because I think this will really resonate with our folks. So thank you so much.